So welcome to all of our webinar attendees for Childhood 2.0 on student well-being and technology. My name is Adrienne Finley Odell. I'm the head of school at Royce Moore School, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to partner with our fellow Evanston Independent Schools and with the Family Institute. And so I want to acknowledge our partner schools tonight. We have Carly Andrews, who's head of school at Baker Demonstration School. We have Maria Brandon, who is head of school at Beacon Academy. We have Robin McLeod Springer, who is head of school at Caravali Montessori. And then our friends from the Family Institute, who have been so generous to partner with us tonight. We have Dr. Benjamin Rosen and Marcus Smith. Thank you so much. You know, as we started thinking about this evening and coming together to do this event, we did so because we were so concerned about the well-being of young people who are on their devices more than ever before during this pandemic. And they've had access to things that we never could have imagined when we were children. My experience as a preteen and teen, probably like many of you, was vastly different from young people today. I remember growing up in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, and behind our cul-de-sac of homes were cornfields that went on forever, and ponds, and I would go exploring and catching tadpoles and going down to the cliffs, and I'd be gone just for hours and hours on end, and basically could come back when it got dark. And in the movie Childhood 2.0, we heard about a lot of parents who talked about that, you know, come home when the streetlights come on. Obviously, that's typically not the experience that young people have today. I also filled my time playing sports and having a job. And if I wanted to connect with my friends, the old telephone that was connected by the long lead to the wall, and fighting with my brother on who got to be on the phone. I usually won. Today, our teens are growing up slowly in a very different way. There's new language that they refer to as the growing up called adulting. And there's a lot of research about what's going on with the young people today that's different. Some of you may be familiar with Jean Twenge's book, iGen. Gen Z, she actually referred to as iGen for this generation, and identified the things that are very, very different for young people today. A lot fewer young people getting driver's licenses these days. Pretty soon they're going to be driverless cars anyway, so they're not going to need them. Less teens having jobs. A lot more oversight and protection of children, kind of keeping them closer to us. And technology has not only become a bit of a pacifier for young people, but also for us adults, where it's become a bit of an addiction. This is universal for young people, and the technology is pervasive in our lives. According to the World Economic Forum recent report, October Future of Jobs Report 2020, by the time today's 8th graders graduate from high school, half of the work that's going to be done in the workforce is going to be done by machines. Half by people, half by machines. That's a very different landscape. And we need to think about the kinds of things we need to prepare young people to be able to do in a world that's like that. And this is just a couple of years away. This is 2025. So the importance of skills like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. Those character qualities of curiosity, initiative, persistence and grit, flexibility, leadership, social and cultural awareness. Having more time away from technology to develop some of these skills and character qualities is going to allow them to really be at the forefront of this really different future. And we still recognize technology isn't going away, but we want them to be creators and to empower them with those skills. So tonight, with our concern about technology and how it's impacting young people, we have so much in common with our schools that this is a conversation that transcends our institutions. So it's not about any of the specific programs in our schools tonight, but how we can partner as a community to support our young people. And so I want to thank our friends here tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Maria Brandon, head of school at Beacon Academy, to take us on the next part of this evening.
Thank you, Robin. I also want to say it's about also partnering with you all parents from all of our different schools so that we can help you, since this is so different from when we all grew up and from when you grew up. We want to do everything we can as a school to support you in your role as parents and to support your students. I want to thank Royce Moore for bringing our schools together tonight. Partnerships like this are especially important during difficult times. And, you know, given everything that's going on with the pandemic, we have never had a more unusual year. Thanks to the many people who have joined us in this conversation tonight, whether on the webinar, watching live on Facebook. We need your engagement, and your voices are important to this work. If you have questions as we go along, please put it in the Q&A feature, not the chat. The Q&A feature is easier to track, and the chat tends to go by very quickly. So please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them. We will be doing questions all at the end. So to ground us in this conversation tonight, I want to introduce Dr. Benjamin Rosen. I'll tell you a little something about him. Benjamin Rosen, PhD. Dr. Rosen received both his master's degree and his PhD in counseling psychology from Virginia Commonwealth University, with an area of concentration in child, adolescent, and family psychology. He completed an APA-accredited pre-doctoral internship at Virginia Treatment Center for Children. In the fall of 2017, Dr. Rosen came to the Family Institute at Northwestern University to complete a 2-year postdoc fellowship. And upon completion in August of 2019, Dr. Rosen moved into his current position at the Family Institute as a staff therapist. Given rising concerns about screen use and mental health, particularly among children and adolescents, Dr. Rosen has taken interest in reading the research literature on this topic and distilling it down to information families can use to navigate the digital world. Dr. Rosen.
Thank you for that introduction, Maria, and thank you for having me tonight. I'm always excited to talk to families about concerns they may have related to screen time. And first, I always want to make clear when I'm having these discussions and giving these talks that while I was trained in graduate school to be a researcher, I'm actually not currently engaged in any research myself. So I cannot claim to be a researcher in this field. But as Maria mentioned in her introduction of me, working as a clinician primarily with preteens and teenagers, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you to hear that over and over and over again, I'm hearing about concerns around screen time. And so I realized quickly that I needed, in order to be an effective clinician, I needed to read and know what was in the research and be able to share that with families. One of the things that I've come across both in my reviews of the literature and in my direct work with families is that this is a very nuanced and complicated topic, which requires nuanced and balanced approaches. So when I see concerning trends, it's often when it's at the more extreme ends of the spectrum. So for instance, the teen who refuses to engage socially or even go to school unless they're on video games or social media. Or on the other end, the child who does not engage with social media and thus misses out on important social interactions and trends that happen there. And it's actually the same when I'm working with parents, because when I'm working with parents, I'm more concerned when the parents are on one end of the extreme end or the other in terms of how strictly or not they are with limiting social media and digital screen time. To be honest, in my own work, if there is a concern, I'm much more likely to find parents who are overly restrictive compared to those parents who might be more disengaged or too permissive. And trust me, I get it for parents when that happens for several reasons. I think the film alluded to this, and I know Adrian and Marja also did, but this is a technology that in some ways is novel and foreign to most parents in terms of social media and digitally connecting with peers as opposed to face-to-face. Also, there's this onslaught of information highlighting the dangers of social media and smartphones, including all of the information that was in the Childhood 2.0 film. So that combination of it being unfamiliar and then hearing about these almost like catastrophic dangers, it's no wonder why parents might feel panicked. But that also makes it harder to have effective conversations and to take effective approaches to digital use. So in my work, I try to alleviate at least a little bit of that anxiety by adding context and nuance to the discussion. That's what I plan to do tonight, although I recognize for some of you, I may be preaching to the choir. I think the film did a really good job of explaining many of the serious dangers associated with social media and smartphone use. So I won't spend my time tonight trying to review those again. But if you haven't had the chance to watch the film, I definitely recommend that you do so. Instead, like I said, tonight I want to use my time to add some context and nuance to the discussion, and then follow it up by reviewing some of the recommendations I often give parents. The first thing I always like to point out when I'm giving this kind of talk is that there's a historical precedent for one generation fearing the ramifications of a new technology on the next generation. So I'm going to try, if I can, to share this photo. So if you can see this photo, it's not an uncommon scene. I'm sure you've seen it, or maybe you've even complained about it. These are teens sitting next to each other, but all of the eyes are focused on the screen and seemingly not engaging with each other. Now, if you thought that this was a new concern, think again, because I'm going to share now. In my research, I came across this cartoon from 1906. It's from a satirical British magazine called Punch, and it's about the invention of the wireless telegraph. And I'll read for you the caption here. It says, "These two figures are not communicating with one another. The lady is receiving an amatory message and the gentleman some racing results." So obviously this is not to diminish or say that there aren't real concerns. I'm not trying to dismiss that. Just saying that we need to put them into proper context without embellishment or having them be sensationalized. Talking about that context and that nuance, for starters, it's important to recognize that there's some important limits to the research around screen time and mental health and how it affects teens. In part, that's because the technology is advancing at such a fast pace that it often outstrips the speed of sound scientific research. And related to that, most of the research that's out right now is conducted in ways that provide correlational data, and so they can't support any causal claims. So for example, and this is an important example for the discussion we're having tonight, it's not clear that time on social media actually causes more depression symptoms. Or maybe instead, it could be that the teens who are already experiencing more depression symptoms are also spending more time on social media. Also, there's mixed, maybe at best, evidence for what's described as displacement theory. So very briefly, that displacement theory suggests that time spent on screens will directly displace non-screen activities. And while it's true that as a whole, youth are spending more time on screens and less time engaging in non-digital activities like face-to-face interaction and physical activity, so far the research shows that this is not true on the individual level. So what I mean by that is that multiple studies have shown in their studies that the individual children and teens who had higher amounts of screen time, well, those teens and children also had higher amounts in non-digital activities, including face-to-face social interactions. This is important because it sheds light into the nuance of the research on social media and mental health challenges. So Adrian held up the book by Jean Twenge, the iGen. Dr. Twenge had one of the most publicized studies come out in 2018 around screen time and mental health, which led to a lot of headlines around how increased screen time could be causing higher rates of depression, suicide, and even suicide attempts. However, when you look closer at the results from that study, you find that the time spent on social media was only related to higher depression symptoms for those adolescents who weren't engaging in much face-to-face socializing. Conversely, the participants in that study, the teenagers who were engaging in frequent face-to-face socializing, for them, more time spent on social media did not lead to higher risk for depression symptoms. Similarly, several studies have suggested that digital forms of communication do not dictate the quality and interaction of relationships. Rather, it's the quality of the pre-established relationship that often determines what effect using digital forms of communication will have. Another important finding is that studies have also shown that it's adolescents who passively use social media that display lower life satisfaction, whereas life satisfaction doesn't necessarily decline if they're interacting with others in a more engaged way, or like actively creating their own content to post. And so I know I'm just scratching the surface here, but these examples kind of bring me to the crux of my approach of working with families around screen time. And I'm sure it's not a surprise to you, but my approach is that balance matters and context matters. So with regards to context, a few bullet points to consider would be, is your child engaged in more active or passive consumption? So again, are they creating and engaging, or are they kind of passively scrolling and maybe comparing to themselves the images that they see? Another one would be, is their social media use augmenting face-to-face social interactions, or is it replacing it for them? And lastly, does this seem like a healthy outlet for generating positive emotions, which social media use, video games can, or is this a source of avoiding dealing with uncomfortable emotions? Obviously, this can change situation by situation, child by child, moment by moment, but it's important to monitor this and to try, if it is starting to lean far in one direction, to then take steps to intervene. As pointed out in the Childhood 2.0 film, obviously it's not realistic to go backwards and eliminate social media and smartphones. But I would go further and say not only is abstinence from screens not really practical, I also think based on the research that I've reviewed, it's not recommended for a few different important reasons. One, it is an important aspect of how teens connect these days. Also, a complete ban would rob children of that opportunity to learn self-regulation skills and strategies. Also, the more that screen time would be banned and like vilified in the home, the more contentious that discussion becomes. And so something I know is emphasized in the film and that I firmly believe in is that the best thing that parents we can do for our children is to be the person that they can come to when challenges arise in the digital arena. And so it's less likely for the teens to come to us as parents if there's already a contentious relationship around screen time with unrealistic limits that would lead kids to assume that their parents just don't get it. So in the place of abstinence, we can try to set healthy limits. But even here, the research suggests that the context matters, not just the amount of screen time. It's also important here to focus on what are the activities you're trying to promote as opposed to what are you trying to curtail. So are you promoting getting engaged in like an extracurricular or getting outside or family engagement activities versus just saying, okay, you got to get off your device and assuming that they'll just get off the device and move to one of those activities that you prefer. The American Academy of Pediatrics actually has a great online tool. It's called a Family Media Calculator. And I'd be happy to send out the link for that if people are interested. So yes, kids do need to learn to socialize using nonverbal cues and facial expressions. They need to learn to face tough or scary moments of possible conflict or awkwardness or even rejection. And they need to learn how to repair a friendship after an argument or hurt feelings. So we want to be careful that smartphone and social media consumption is not just an avoidance strategy to get out of facing something challenging like this. But it doesn't mean kicking them off social media to go outside until the lights come on. Because doing so would rob them of important social interactions that are happening online. Instead, I always recommend trying to balance it with those opportunities for face-to-face socializing. Again, whether that's encouraging them to make plans with friends, obviously right now socially distanced, or helping them get involved in an extracurricular activity, Or even if there do seem to be some social skill deficits, signing them up for a social skills group, which I know there are social skills groups that are still able to happen virtually right now. And yes, in terms of self-esteem, I definitely can see that it's significantly more challenging to navigate teen years while having to make comparisons to yourself, comparisons to others, to yourself on social media, having more of that instant awareness of things you might be not included in or left out on, or even being the victim of cyberbullying. But again, I would say, and when I work with parents, I say to totally cut off like smartphone use and social media, not only would probably not have the desired effect, but would also possibly make it worse by isolating your child. And so instead, I recommend talking to children and having that conversation around things like, what does it mean to be a good digital citizen? To engage with your children, to know what types of messages they're receiving and to help them process those messages, to be that safe space for them if they're encountering unkind messages online, and then to know when it gets to be excessive and how to advocate for your child. Obviously, again, these strategies will differ a little bit on age and developmental level. And so again, I'm happy to talk in more detail. I'm happy to follow up and answer questions. Thank you for the time tonight. I know, again, this is just scratching the surface, but I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ben. Now we are going to, we're going to hear from Marcus in just a moment, but your reflections were really, really insightful. And I think that piece about making sure that kids are getting both the opportunity to interact with their friends and augmenting is really important. And how can we do that right now in these pandemic times? So we're going to turn it over to Marcus D. Smith. Mr. Smith graduated from University of Maryland, College Park with a bachelor's in psychology in 2009 and a Master of Clinical Counseling from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in 2011. Mr. Smith continues his clinical training to pursue a doctorate in counseling education and supervision. His years of clinical and advocacy experience show a strong passion for working with underserved populations and families through a trauma-focused lens. From residential psychiatric to private practice settings, Mr. Smith has been able to specialize in LGBTQ identity and supportive therapy, grief counseling, spirituality, anxiety disorders, play therapy, life transitions, and mindfulness. His other professional involvement and leadership positions include being a member of the American Counseling Association and Association for Counselor Education and Supervision. Mr. Smith is a contributing author for academic publications in counseling, and he's also the co-founder of Coffee Hour Chicago, a consultation group for clinicians. And we are looking forward to hearing from Marcus. He's going to be addressing victimization, the aspect of technology and bullying. So take it away, Marcus.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm very appreciative of being here this evening. Thank you so much, Adrian, Marsha, all of you, to go ahead and bring some space for us to go ahead and talk about this in the community. And so it's kind of Robin said, it's, you know, a lot of my experiences working with underserved populations and marginalized communities. And so I kind of like to see myself as I solidify my identity in the counseling field is being this liaison, right, for underserved communities and just bringing, right, practical knowledge, right, from research to the community. So which is why I'm here today. So here, I would like to go ahead and share a little visual, share something for my visual learners this evening. Hopefully, I'm hoping that you guys can see everything. Let me see. Yeah, so hopefully you can see everything. And so I wanted to make sure that you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about as I kind of go through it. But yeah, this documentary was amazing. And it's a really great reflection. It's a bit bigger for them. Okay. Let me go ahead and See, technology is great in some aspects, and then sometimes it can fail you. Is that better, guys?
Yeah, it looks good, Marcus.
All right, awesome. So yeah, so in speaking of what just happened just now, right? You want to take your time, right, with technology. This isn't something that you want to go ahead and rush right into, and expect to know everything about. So having these really tough conversations, right, is really important to kind of understanding your young person's world, right, and understanding how you can be immersed in the process as well in regards to technology. So in regards to victimization online, presence and being online, one of the common denominators that I see just in practice, in addition to some of the aspects that were pointed out in the documentary, were, just the desire for connection, right? Was when we really think about that, right, and what we did as young folks, right, and what we did for fun, that desire to go ahead and connect to our peers, right, and have sense of belonging was definitely a focal point, right, for a lot of us, right? Aside from, like the documentary mentioned, boredom, right, and at times it might be an escape. And so we don't necessarily want to go ahead and demonize, right, those possibilities of how young people might kind of go towards technology to, in these cases. And so I try to go ahead and encourage people to go ahead and have, as you can see, a yes and approach, right? So being able to finally, when we sit down with our young person and really acknowledge what is the significance and functionality of their use, and first of all, having the curiosity, right, of why they use technology. And when we find out what that is, then being able to, like Ben said, kind of add to that experience versus trying to completely take away and go cold turkey, which is just totally not realistic in this day and age, right? Within our cultural norms that we have going on, technology is not going anywhere. So, but what we need to know, right, in regards to predators that are out there in the screen, in incorporating this yes and approach, right, is making sure that our young folks have this information and this knowledge. So you'll see here on my Padlet here is things to kind of go over with our young person really is going to be in this section here, realistic tools. So we'll get to that in a second. But we'll kind of cover, right, some statistics and just risk factors, right, in phases that a predator will kind of go through in their engagement, okay? So, what we know, as you can see, that some of the research that that I provided here was from 2003, and the documentary definitely has some more updated research, but it's very telling, right? For the numbers to go ahead and be here at this point, right? They definitely have grown, right, today, and there's new research being done, right, to kind of see what that type of engagement looks like from just adults as well as our youth during this pandemic, right? It definitely has had a toll on all of us, and we're definitely using technology a whole lot more. So, but some specific statistics that are out there is that 19% of students report unwanted sexual solicitation, right? And 25% of them reported unwanted exposure to that sexual material, right? So they're not, 25% of them aren't even asking for it, right? And then so that number had grew 6% by 2005. So that's over 15 years ago, guys. So this 15 years ago, around 2005, I remember that was kind of 2003, 2004, I believe that was the release of Facebook around that era. And so when that number had increased in 2005, just imagine what that number looks like today with all the media outlets. And so even my nephew, children as young as 5 are using technology, right? And especially during this pandemic, we have to kind of think from the lens, not only is my child using more technology, but how am I possibly supporting, right, this technology use, right? In some ways, right? Depending on the family and the makeup of the family, and if you're limited supports, right, you might need to do just that. Find your favorite, the favorite television show of your young child, right, while you're trying to get work done. And so there are certainly ways to be able to amend that, right? If you be able to reach out for some additional supports, right? If you want to go ahead and scale back and if you have a lot more concerns that these things are happening in your home. As been mentioned, and a lot of us have mentioned thus far, and I kudo that, is just that, and I second that, is just that, a lot of our young people are searching for friendships and even romances online. I have a lot of those cases in my therapy cases. And so what we do want, like Ben had mentioned earlier, is that we want to be that space and relationship where they can feel comfortable to kind of talk, right? Communicate, right? To face-to-face, just the people that are in the household, right? Let alone their friends that they can call, right? Or make Zoom calls, etc. So predators out there, they have all the time in the world. And so they know that there are certain risk factors that are going on, especially now, right? Predators don't necessarily need to, meet young people, right? In a physical space to have access to them now, right? And so as long as a picture and a video can be sent, and a lot of times, and especially, what's occurring now, right? That's enough, right? And so some of the additional pieces to these risk factors, aside from what research talks about, is just the naivety of in our young people, the grandiosity of just like, oh, I got it, I know what's out there, self-esteem issues, right? Past history of trauma, and depending on your neighborhood, right? SES, right? And some individuals may not feel as safe to go outside and connect, right? Even socially distance-wise, right? And what's going on. And so predators definitely know that information, and so they definitely bank on some of these issues, right? And I know that these risk factors are like, well, that's every teen, or that's every kid that's out there, isn't it? And you're right, to some extent, right? That's every human being that's that's out there, or at least every young person that's out there. And so because of that universality aspects, right? So no one is exempt. And so even if your child presents like, oh, I got it, I got this under control. Okay, I trust you, sweetie. I trust you. But I want to make sure that we're practicing some things that can create some, some areas of protection and everything against you from other predators, because predators are not going to bat an eye, right? Regardless if they are streetwise or not, right? So the development of the engagement that typically takes place, right, is that they'll start off with grooming. A lot of times, the literature kind of talks about, and just in some of the cases that I've actually seen in some of my clients, the adult will be very direct with the young person, and literally share pictures, share images, mention, doing something with their body parts, just to see how the young person will react to them mentioning that in conversation or in the chat or whatever, right? And so that's a sense of baiting and seeing how an individual will go ahead and respond to what they're bringing to in the situation. Also secrets, right? Keeping things secretive, right? That's another thing that, they'll kind of do to groom a child, right? To see how many secrets that they can hold, secrets that they will hold of the child, etc. Right? I won't get you in trouble. And that goes hand in hand with the next kind of phase, is the building trust, right? So a lot of times a predator will also kind of, get into sharing their life stories or made up, right, false stories to gain the empathy of the child, right? Making them feel bad for them as they engage in their conversations. And also to, they'll even mention compliments, right? And mention things towards the kid that they will try to make sure that they, if the kid shares something that they've experienced, they'll make sure that they let them know that they wouldn't tell their parents, they wouldn't want them to get in trouble, right? Things of those nature, language like that. And so then lastly, of course, it gets into the direct suggestion to go ahead and meet up, right? Or in this case, is during the pandemic, right? If they're even more bold, right? They will be content with sharing pictures and videos, and a lot of times they are okay with that, right? So what do we do? What do we do, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary individuals, right? What do we do? So in the moment, right, we want to go ahead, even if your child already has an electron, some, devices and things that they kind of go to for school, right, or leisure, you want to kind of create an expectation of weekly, monthly monitoring of the social media, right? And I mean, like literally, like what's going on in there, their messages and things of that nature, the archives of messages, right? Group chats that are there, and letting them know that you just want to go ahead and, again, that they are trustworthy of being able to combat some of these things, but also being additional support, right? For them to make sure that, hey, did you notice this picture that someone has sent you? Yeah, this would be a no, a no-go. This would be something that we want to be concerned about, sweetie, right? To your child, right? Unfollowing strangers, right? I like what Ben had mentioned about whether or not, what type of engagement that you're doing while you are online. So it's like, are you actively, engaging, or is it passive, right? So if your young person is actually trying to create a foundation, or if they're trying to create a profile or a base where they can create material, right, and encourage other young people and create a following. If that's a thing, be engaged in that process, right? Be engaged with people that they are following, right, and who's seeing, like random strangers, etc. We also want to limit, right? We also want to go ahead and limit. We want to avoid posting, right, their locations, right? So that there's a tag function, right, with their pictures and things of that nature. They can tag the school that they're at, they can tag their neighborhood or parks that they're at, and things of that nature. We want to make sure that they're just not tagging. Post all you want, but make sure that you're not tagging where you are, right? Making sure that one email connects to all the social media profiles, right? In covering the reality of recruiting from peers, right? So in group chats that your child gets linked to, right, or gets invited to, do they know who's all in the group chat? Sometimes this is what happens, right? Their own peers become recruiters for sex trafficking, right? And that's a thing, and it's rampant in Chicago currently right now. And so are they aware of who is in this group chat, whether it be a study group or, with their friends, right? Who is all here? Do they know who's all in the group chat? Also covering the risk of sharing pics, right? Obviously, once you put your information out there, right? Is this picture that you want to go ahead and post right now a picture that you are okay with being in the oblivion, in the cloud forever, right? Because to some degree, right, it's being saved, right, by the app that you're posting it to, right? And it's not just in your particular phone, right? Photo gallery. Also covering the insights of grooming language, like, do they know what it sounds like? Do they know what it looks like, right? And so you can bring this up in just casual conversation, right? Do they know what grooming looks like? Yeah, mom, yeah, dad, I know, you comb your hair, I brushed my teeth this morning. No. I mean, like, do you know what it sounds like if a person was trying to get you to do something that you didn't feel comfortable, right, doing, right? And do you know what baiting, right? Another word to kind of look at grooming is baiting, right? Do you know what that looks like and sounds like, right? And getting what their feedback is. Pause, through the awkward silence and letting them respond. Also making it a collaborative effort. So just a good boundary, right? And I know that, work has increased for a lot of us during the pandemic, but we want to go ahead and create that value of shutting things down at the end of the night, getting some good rest, right? And some balance, has been kind of mentioned earlier. Valuing a trusting relationship within and outside of their use of technology, right? So what areas can you praise your young person through their chores, or just being kind in the household and helping out, that you can instill with them that you are trusting of them. Not only that, how often you're just connecting with them and desiring to be in their space, right? They know in their peripheral that they have someone that cares to be around them and loves them, right? So they don't have to second guess that, right? If your child isn't just a little bit annoyed, I love when the documentary also mentioned that too. If your child isn't just a little bit annoyed with your presence, right? That's actually a good thing, right? Having that sense of annoyance. Also understanding boundaries and its impact to friendship, right? I went over this for a number of cases that I have. And so do our child know what boundaries are, right? What does it look like, right? Do they know what can happen with certain individuals that they've been socializing with? I've had kids literally, felt like they needed to go ahead and stop talking to certain peers. And I just asked them and the parent, I said, wait, did you use this boundary? Did you, let them know that certain things make you uncomfortable, and see how they responded to that boundary? And they hadn't tried it out, right? And so sometimes kind of going through the ebbs and flows of what, the development, how you can gain and maintain friendships, right? They need to kind of work through that and understand how that goes. And so I also suggest family therapy, right? If there's significant conflict around creating balance, right? Individual therapy is definitely encouraged, right? If a child is struggling with low self-esteem and making friends, right? So if you know your child, and if they are typically struggling at the moment with making friends in addition to this pandemic, sometimes, individual therapy is very helpful, so that, they can have an additional voice that not on the screen, right? Not on the screen to a random stranger, but a trained professional on how to navigate some of this stuff, how to connect with some of their peers in school. And lastly, you'll see, hopefully, a lot of our parents and the individuals that logged in to continue that yes and approach, right? These are some different options that they can engage in, right? So, and not just with family and themselves, but these are different things that they can engage in with their peers, right? Can you engage in hobbies at a distance, or arts and craft at a distance, right? Or a book club with your friends, right? You're reading the same material, right? Do you know what extracurricular activities or clubs are involved at your school, at your child's school, so that they can be involved in some virtual meetings, right? The drama club, the poetry, right? And things of that nature. And for my sports lovers, right? How can we, continue to, right, scratch that itch with, some of our friends and peers, with social distancing in mind. It's very, very possible, but there's a number of things that we can do. And we just have to continue to be creative. Like the documentary you mentioned, I love when the seasoned woman spoke about doing all these chores and being on the farm and never really knowing what bored was, right? She was trying to actually search for those moments of peace and rest, probably. And so in this case, we can work with that, right? We can work with what balance looks like, and to be able to sort through that boredom, and to also be able to connect to their peers in very creative ways. So if you know that is the motivation, knowing that you were a young person and you had those same motivations, there's ways to go ahead and work through that. That's all.
Mr. Smith, thank you so much. And it was such an important reminder for all of us that the root of our work as parents is to create open and trusting relationships. That yes and approach, that curious stance, and to keep an openness in the relationship. Thank you very much. So the next portion of our evening is dedicated to your questions for our panel. So I would invite you to note questions that you have in the Q&A portion of the screen. And please direct content-related questions rather than questions related to our respective schools. So with that in mind, I will read the first question for our panel. So, at what age do you recommend a child be allowed to have accounts in Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc.?
It's a great question, and I wish I had a great, specific answer. But I will say, as I was saying in my earlier comments, context really matters. So thinking about things like your child's maturity level and developmental level, which can be different than chronological age, right? And thinking about what relationship do you have with your child to feel confident that you're going to be able to have those engaging conversations about what your kid is hearing and coming across and engaging with online. I really like, Marcus, you're framing it as trust and support. I think there really does need to be that balancing act where when they start, we don't, I know that there's concerns about too much invasion of privacy and we're going to be all in every text message and everything. And that may not be helpful either, but at the same time, being able to have those conversations about, we know that this is something that you're going to start and we're supportive of that, but we also want to support you in that as well as you're learning about engaging in this new platform or medium as you're starting out on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat. I think it's also taking into account kind of peer activity. Is your child really missing out on it? Are they connecting and saying, all right, we're all going to get on this game, or we're all going to meet here, we're all going to, if your child is not on that platform. And not that kind of peer pressure should be the guiding factor, obviously. But I think it's important to take that context into account in addition to, again, your child's kind of maturity level and being able to process the messages that are coming in on their own, plus being able to engage with you. So I don't have specific ages. I wish I did. I wish it was simpler.
Yeah, I agree, Ben. I didn't know if you guys wanted to answer one question at a time, but
we have 10 minutes total, so maybe we go back and forth unless that you're really passionate about addressing this one. Okay,
sure.
So I'm going to throw out another question. Is there any research on the impact of screen time on the brain? That is there anything negative about screen time on young children, toddlers, and elementary age kids?
I saw that question come through and I was thinking, unfortunately, kind of the neuroscience is past a little bit the area of my expertise. But in reviewing some of the literature and even just a very general way, part of what I was saying before about the pace of the technology advancements outstripping the pace of research, it's been really tough to nail down longitudinal research data on things like brain structure and brain development. I will say, though, there is a study, I think it's, I forget exactly when it started, but they've started publishing just in the last year or two, the ABCD study, which I think stands for Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study. And they are looking at changes. They're looking at survey data, but also doing imaging and looking at brain structure. And my memory is that their very preliminary research showed that there was some differences in brain structure, but there wasn't enough information to determine, was that actually a negative impact or was it just a difference, the same way any life experiences can influence how the brain develops. So I think that there's more to be told on that as the research furthers.
I can also jump in on that with neuroscience as my background. Harvard has done some research that shows two things you need to look out for particularly. One is the effect of blue light on kids and their sleep and kids losing REM sleep, particularly if they've got their device next to them. Kids who are being texted, between 10 and midnight, up to 1,000, 10,000 texts, that going off keeps them up. There's that FOMO, fear of missing out. So blue light and kids losing REM sleep is one effect. The other is that the constant checking of the device, it plays into your variable reward system, which is, very much like pulling the slots in Las Vegas, right? And the younger the kid, the less developed their skills are to manage that kind of reward feedback. And it can lead to obsessive behavior, obsessive checking, not being able to get out of that. So that's the second thing to look out of, because the younger the child, that set of functions isn't as well developed yet. So that's all from the Harvard research.
Right.
Oh, sorry, my turn to ask a question. To your point about monthly monitoring, my 14-year-old son views this as a complete intrusion and a statement that I do not trust him or respect him, regardless of how I explain it to him. What would you recommend?
Right. So again, just kind of paraphrasing it in a way and packaging it in a way that you are trying to support them, right? And you do trust his, right? His or her actions, right? In that process, but you also want to make sure that that you can support him in being able to go ahead and see other aspects that he might miss, right? It's as much as there's a little bit of resistance, right? That is okay. That means you're doing a good job, right? That means you're being vigilant, right? And engaging, right, with what your young person is doing.
Want me to ask another question?
Sure.
How do you recommend monitoring messages that disappear? Snapchat, for instance.
Right. So in those cases, right, you're not going to be able to go ahead and see the disappeared message per se, right? But you can be able to go ahead and see, because they save them to your camera roll, right? So at least you're aware of what your child is saving and what they're posting, because although they post to Snapchat, right, and it's gone, right, for others, you may not be able to see what others are sending to them unless they save it themselves, right? So again, that's where that balance of trust, right, comes in, because you're not going to be, and that's the other thing to the other person as well that had the previous question. Babe, I don't want to go ahead and be here every day, right? Surveilling, right? Your use, right? And that's not what I'm trying to do. I do trust you, right? And so in those moments where you're not able to be there and see those messages, right? You're engaging in an act of trust there, right? And so emphasizing for them to be aware of that.
Are kids from more marginalized communities more susceptible to grooming or baiting?
Yeah. So I think that what I mentioned earlier is that one of the at-risk populations, right, and marginalized groups, right, that are there are individuals with disabilities, children, women in cases, and so forth, right, and individuals with low SES, and I could go on, right, and so children, especially in the tween and younger, right, are definitely going to be more at risk to, right, some of these issues because of the naivety, right, and the grandiosity that's there at times, and the fear, the FOMO, right, that happens. So just having that awareness, and even if your kid is aware, right, of that as well, right? Are you aware? Why? How come a predator wouldn't reach out to mommy and daddy? Why do you think that is?
Mm-hmm.
And sit, silence. Right, that can be very telling, and let your young person kind of come to those conclusions.
There's a question here. Can you discuss healthy ways to reach out to other parents about behaviors of their children online that you have seen through your own child's online activity? Is there ever a reason not to speak to the other parent?
Healthy ways to reach out to other parents in their engagement.
So you've seen something that their child did.
I would I would take at least part of that question and thinking about the last part of, are there reasons why you would not? And thinking about, is this the type of interpersonal conflict that actually we want kids to be able to engage in, to be able to build those skills of how do you navigate an awkward, possibly conflictual situation and see it to the other side, as opposed to, as soon as we see it, my parents are going to come in and step in and take care of it. And then they're growing up in life not knowing how to deal with that type of conflict. And then when they do find it as an adult, there's more stress of, what the heck do I do now? So I would speak to that part of it. I'm not sure, I don't know, Marcus, if you're aware of like specific platforms and avenues for parents to connect outside of Facebook and other traditional platforms.
I think this question is really about if you've seen something on your child's phone. I've seen on my child's phone that your child did something at a party that was unsafe. So this isn't, maybe it's not, I think that was a great point about making sure that, is this a problem a child can solve on their own? But what if it's not? How could you approach a parent?
It's a good question. I think
that is a good question.
Depending on the context, again, I'm thinking, I think there's a lot of situations like that where I would want to first, I would encourage the parents to first have a conversation with their child about what was found on their phone.
Yeah.
And try to understand that. And so, but I think that again depends on age and depends on the context. I would do that for older teens, maybe for younger teens and tweens, maybe not as much. But I guess I wish there's not like a exact roadmap to say, okay, here's the things, reach out to the other parent, here's the things not to. Obviously, things like safety, self-harm, I would err on the side of caution and reach out to that other parent.
Yeah, and then the other parts of that, because now I'm thinking about in certain situations, and I know we're limited on time, but that has came up, and so I think that's the learning lesson, right? Does my child get? You are exposing yourself to the world, and you are sharing this with the world, this information, right? And so whatever you put out there, people are going to go ahead and take that information and do anything with it. Right. And so is the child, in the wrong place for speaking up to their friend and saying, hey, they were concerned? Are they able to speak up to that? Right. And also, is the parent in the wrong for sharing, right, with another parent as well? Right. Like, hey, I just noticed this, come up last week. I don't think that they are, because their child is sharing that information. You're bound to have that experience, and so that's a learning experience for that child that either has posted some concerning stuff, to know that this type of behavior is unhealthy, right? And you want to be very careful with what you share in the world. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
So I'm aware it is 6:30. And we indicated that this event was going to be an hour long, and all of a sudden, lots of questions have poured into the Q&A, which are really good questions. But in recognition of everyone's precious time tonight and probably getting kids to bed and having dinner and all of that good stuff, I am going to bring our conversation to a close. That being said, these great questions, I really encourage those of you who have posted these questions to talk with, you could reach out to the Family Institute. You can talk with the division heads and teachers at your children's school, with the heads of school, any of us here. This is what we're here for. We are here to support you. All of us have resources at our schools that can help you if you're going through difficult times with your children. And we especially realize that this time of the pandemic is especially isolating and can feel like you're really disconnected and don't know where to go and what to do. But our small communities, our small schools, we have this beauty of really knowing each other, and that we are here to support your children and to support you. So I encourage that additional outreach. And I want to thank again, Beacon Academy, Caravali Montessori, and Baker Demonstration School for partnering with Royce Moore tonight for this first of its kind event. Hopefully we could do more of these in the future if there are topics that you all would like to engage in. And I want to thank Marcus and Ben with the Family Institute. You have been such tremendous partners and do such great work in our community. And I thank you for all of the help and support you give young people. So thanks for keeping us healthy and safe. Everyone out there, stay healthy and safe yourself, and have a great evening.
And thank you, Royce Moore, for pulling us all together. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks
Have a
again.
great night.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Bye,
Thanks, guys.
everybody.
Take care.